And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happenstance into this Patrick Lovell Truth Bomb riff of the Clean New Deal slash the con and the $71 trillion truth that reveals all. And I was triggered throughout the last several days, particularly what's going on between Trump and Epstein and all things MAGA and the reaction most notably. But right before I hit record on this, I happened to watch a podcast from Mark Elias, who I think is a really good guy, a great attorney doing incredibly important work. But he had interviewed former attorney general under the Obama administration, between whom he's had a very tight relationship for many years. And I think really was just the perfect sort of completion of what it is that I need to express to you, so that somehow this gets through. Like always, please like, subscribe, share, and most notably share, because this information that I'm about to provide to you is really, I'd say, the culmination of years and years and years of effort on my behalf and the team that I've worked with to get this information that I'm going to provide for you, but in context to what's going on. So that reveals all that nobody can actually touch, particularly in the mainstream, because of what they're demonstrating now. So let me start with the everything that everybody's responding to, particularly in mainstream media, as it relates to Epstein and Trump. First and foremost, if you watch anything on NBC, MSNBC, any sort of Democrat leaning juxtaposition analysis, commentary, both in mainstream media as well as online. And I might even throw in there, the former CNN host, he just happened to pop up on my radar earlier today that exemplifies this whole thing. Why can't I think of his name? The black guy that Elon Musk just blew up last year, and I shouldn't refer to him that. I should refer to him as the black gay guy. Not like there's anything wrong with that, to quote Seinfeld, but his name will come to you in a minute. He's so forgetful that I'm forgetting his name at the moment, but I think many of you may remember him from years and years on CNN, and of course he got in a lot of scandal because of his personal preferences, among other things. Not like there's anything wrong with it, like I just said, but sorry for being a jerk on that front. But it just encapsulates what's going on. So everybody who's had a beef with MAGA, who has been really beside themselves since Hillary Clinton and Pizzagate and all of the other elements that are involved with this weird MAGA hyper focus, and that's not the way I want to look at it. I mean, they're obsessed with sexual depravity. They're obsessed with um, with what is it when you? And this is how far from the mix that I am in terms of this lifestyle, because I've never been a victim of this. But what is it called when you sleep with underage people? Doesn't matter. You all know what I'm talking about, because that's the central sort of focus of MAGA and their reaction between, of course, Trump's DOJ, Pam Bondi, and uh, Kash Patel, FBI director, and Bongino, who has made, the assistant director at the FBI, who's made a career of Epstein, and everybody was behind revealing the so-called Epstein files for so long. And then, of course, last week, Pam Bondi's Justice Department basically said, we're moving on, nothing to see here, there's no list, and this and that. And it created this furor, as we've seen everywhere. And mainstream media suddenly is tagged in, and guys that I like to watch, like Lawrence O'Donnell and others that I have somewhat respect for, but reluctant respect for, Rachel Maddow, the Rachel Maddows of the world, although there is only one Rachel Maddow. Obviously, I can't watch anybody else on MSNBC besides Rachel and Lawrence. But the hyper focus of Epstein is the way that MAGA is reacting. It has nothing to do with Epstein. And again, Epstein was 20 years ago when most of this stuff was going down, when it was the Bush administration to begin with, when all of these, Epstein Island and, let's call it the elites and the Lolita Express and whomever, pedophile is the word that I was thinking of. These rich, very powerful people that would go to these events, particularly on Epstein Island. And this is, the sort of catch-all out there is the list. Who would be on the list? And then, of course, anybody who knows intelligence knows that somebody like Epstein, who was as dialed in as he was for whatever reasons he was, would never carry a list. But of course, he was running with some of the most powerful people in the world. And yeah, there's pictures of, more than anyone else, Donald Trump, who is close friends, if not best friends, with Epstein for 15 years. And as Michael Wolff's work has revealed, that they went so far, it was just a sick relationship. They'd go as far as like trying to cheat on each other's girlfriends and lying the whole way, and whatever depravity was involved with Epstein Island, and of course the connection with Mar-a-Lago, because we know that some of the masseuses from Mar-a-Lago wound up in Epstein. The connections are everywhere. Obviously the pictures are everywhere. We know that during the last election cycle that Trump was flying around on the Lolita Express. Are you kidding me? Not to mention he got Melania. He was introduced to Melania in whatever relationship that took from Epstein. So it's absolutely insane that any of this is even not front and center the entire time that Trump was running, let alone the fact that Epstein died while he was in custody in prison during Trump's first term. And yet all of mainstream media, particularly on MSNBC, like I just caught a 5-minute segment, and that's all I could watch of Morning Joe, and all of the others, again, just plugging into this. Oh my God, this is a rift in MAGA, and they're going to devour each other, and this is part of this conspiracy theory, and this is what happens when you let this thing run amok that turns into things like Q, and it's blowing up in their face, and it's going to have ramifications for the midterms and all this other crap. And it's just high school. It's high school. Meanwhile, we know that Epstein was deeply involved with the country's largest financial too big to fail bank apparatuses, as well as some of the largest hedge funds and private equity guys and richest people in the United States that were laundering money to fund these Epstein-related activities. And we know that Epstein was not a financial genius. Apparently, he had some sort of modicum of, value in terms of being able to offshore taxes and, maybe do some management on behalf of high net worth individuals, but not to the level that those guys would hire. They would hire PhD guys and masters and some of the best in the business that had the best access and everything else. And Epstein wasn't that guy. Epstein was a guy that was exactly what he looks like. Now, do I have evidence that he was a CIA asset in cahoots with Mossad? No, it looks pretty damn obvious, all things considered. And what kind of information does he have? Well, was he running around with Clinton for a long time? Oh, yeah. Does it turn out that he was running around with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Sultan? Oh, yeah. Was he involved with like heavyweights all over the place? Has Dershowitz said that he has? I mean, it goes on and on and on. But what is not being discussed is why all these arteries and what they lead to. No, we just end up with the surface sensational drivel, but it has nothing to do with the systemic apparatus of what Epstein was a part of, let alone that he died in captivity during Trump's first administration. And oh yeah, it's like, why would everybody at that level be quiet? Why wouldn't everybody, for example, the second that Epstein died, I mean, it was news for a little bit, but there was never really any super deep dive. It was so obvious that the mainstream media was trying to avoid the subject like the plague. Don't ask questions people forget. But here we are many years later, and I happen to say this on one of my social media posts last night. I've always associated, quite frankly, Trump with Mussolini. And maybe you know what I'm inferring by that, but it seems to me that in this corollary, that the billionaires have played roulette with our democracy to enable a transactional pig like Trump to become the president in all manner, shape, or form of what is occurring before our eyes, which is literally a war on the law, a war on our free markets, a war on democracy, a war on everything that matters to the United States on behalf of what? A billionaire class that's in complete control. But the billionaires played roulette with Trump vis-a-vis media guys like Jeff Zucker and Les Moonves, chiefs of CNN and Paramount, respectively, are famously quoted as he was good for ratings. And then he was, you know, basically, what do we say when, look, if you've seen any of my truth bombs with David K. Johnston, you know that Donald Trump has been involved with organized crime going back to the 70s. The fact that he was normalized during this sort of epoch, I'd think of it, in the early 2000s with The Apprentice and what that led to in the midst of what was going on behind the scenes because of what I've revealed in many of my truth bombs as well, and what got ferreted out in the civil rights trial that almost bankrupted him last year before he won the presidency, when New York State AG Letitia James proved the case that he had been involved with massive falsification of business records and all manner, shape, or form of fraud against banks, that there was this $450 million settlement, which is just the tip of the iceberg of what he was involved with Deutsche Bank that connects him to Putin and so on and so forth. So Trump has been involved with organized crime on a global basis for now decades, okay? And so after the insurrection, after the Supreme Court basically ruled, because they've been hijacked by the same billionaire class, that we're going to have what's known as the executive or unitary presidency, which is he's above the law, which enabled all of these things to happen post-insurrection, where the sum total of the Biden administration's Justice Department couldn't get all of the collective cases through the process to bring even further verdicts against Donald Trump for being involved with racketeering in Georgia, not to mention, whatever the violations were with the, top secret clearance information that he took to Mar-a-Lago and sold on the open market. And then, of course, all of this stuff goes by the wayside, and we wind up with this criminal president that's created a literal racketeering presidency, a RICO presidency. And I happen to know a thing or two about the racketeering from the perspective that, as a producer, I created a project with my team that we provided for you that you can find at thecon.tv that reveals the largest criminal racketeering and cover-up in history that never ended. That leads us to what's behind me, the Clean New Deal. But the thing that triggered me the most about all of the nature of what's going on with this salacious volcano of Epstein, in the context of nobody talking about what matters with Epstein, is the fact that Trump announced, I think last Friday, that he's going to basically wage a campaign that it was the Obama administration that falsified documents and forgeries to frame Trump for Epstein. Now, I find that fresh, considering what I just told you about Letitia James and the falsification of documents. And by the way, that's what took Trump down in the 34 felony convictions, was falsification of business documents. Trump has been involved with falsifying business documents for now 3 decades, to my knowledge, and he was never taken down. So when AGs and DAs don't do their job, and you don't do the investigation, and you don't prosecute people above the line, which I'd call the billionaire class, you just set yourself up for playing roulette with the rule of law in our country to ultimately usher in this calamity of racketeering, which is the entirety of everything that's now gutting the Department of Education, go figure, so nobody can think critically. This on top of DOGE, that's destroyed science and all preliminary warning systems that lead to disasters like what took place last week in Texas. But you can't even keep up with that because so many things are happening nonstop. But since the beginning of Trump's presidency, while Elon was inflicting DOGE and big balls in the payment systems at the Treasury and Social Security and taxes, while they're decimating the Veterans Affairs Administration and all other elements of the FAA and everything that keeps us safe in this country, not to mention NOAA, right? The atmospheric science involved in research with all things, the environment. They're rug pulling that for the fossil fuel industry. So we don't know the correlation between the calamity of climate change, and they want everybody in the dark. It's a full scale Orwellian war against people having a cognitive understanding so that we can have a critically a thoughtful populace that can hold power to account. This is the technocratic wizardry of the Koch enterprises for decades that have been immersed with the likes of Sheldon Adelson's fortune, as well as the Mercer's fortune, and so on and so forth, which is a cabal, in addition to Leonard Leo, that ended up creating a backdoor $1.6 billion trust fund to the Supreme Court that is completely freaking in on the racketeering. Okay? I mean, the predicate acts are everywhere. And ultimately, they're talking about falsification of business records of the Obama administration to pin Epstein on Donald Trump. And again, Trump being up to his eyeballs in falsification of business records for decades. Lie, deny, switch the blame, and implicate to cover up, in Trump's and Epstein's case, pedophilia and rape of what? Younger women that people are incredibly, out of their minds about, and justifiably so, especially that it was never brought down and everybody's like, fingers pointing in other directions and nobody claiming power or because the whole system is owned by the billionaire apparatus that's gang raping the system. But that leads you to understand that what we've revealed in our collective work, that we're dealing with tens of millions of falsification of business records. And the largest criminal RICO conspiracy in the history of the world that led to this gang rape of tens of millions of people financially that, oh yeah, our courts were involved with. Now, the reason I brought up another trigger was Eric Holder appearing side by side with Mark Elias as the good guy, saying he doesn't recognize the Department of Justice. That he lays out all of these elements that, look, everybody knew what the law was, that you could be involved with people from different sides of the political spectrum, ideological spectrum, engage in sports and everything else, but they were all professionals at the Department of Justice that do their job so that they could work for the American people based on the integrity of the system, i.e. the law. But that is a lie. A lie bigger than any other of the other lies, of the thousands and thousands of lies that have come since in the Trump administration and the first administration that led to impeachment, that he never went anywhere because they got the numbers, because these technocrats know how to play dirty behind the scenes, because money corrupts absolutely through the revolving door. Okay? It's corruption through racketeering. But what did Eric Holder not do? He was the Attorney General of the United States. The con is the investigation that his Department of Justice didn't do because they covered up exactly what I'm telling you. And Obama went so far as to being on 60 Minutes, and he made this proclamation that said what Wall Street did was unethical, but it wasn't, and this was his legal term, necessarily illegal. Meanwhile, it was illegal every step of the way. And who do I have that's corroborating what it is that I'm revealing to you? Not just corroborating, they were the sources for it. Former state AGs that got a RICO, well, the only RICO conviction in the entire world predicated on all of these elements that I'm talking about, Mark Dan from the great state of Ohio. Then I worked closely and in simpatico, and I was mentored, and it was the greatest honor of my life to learn from William K. Black, a criminologist and a man who brought down with his team the savings and loan crisis back in the 80s, where they jailed 7,000 white-collar executives for what was phase one of what would lead to the great financial crisis in 2008. If you're just now turning 18 and you're just coming into the world and you're being born into this insane situation, you're not aware of all the fraud that has happened in this country, particularly with our financial system, going back to the 80s. The savings and loan crisis, the junk bond crisis, all of the elements that were involved with the WorldCom apparatus. And then we had the tech bomb of the 2000s, early 2000s, right actually at the millennium. And then we ended up with Enron and others. And all of these elements were just more and more sophisticated financial fraud until it became the great financial crisis, which was the housing bubble that then led to what was the basically derivatives bubble. And you might refer to it as The Big Short, a movie that showcased one of my favorite actresses in the business, Margot Robbie, sitting in a hot tub describing collateralized debt obligations and securities. It was a great idea from Michael Lewis and Brad Pitt and Plan B, who made that film, and Adam McKay, who wrote it, to be able to try to get the idea of complex financial instruments in the minds of regular Americans that don't understand that what you're investing in is part of a massive global crime spree. But they didn't get it completely right in The Big Short. In fact, the final 5 minutes of The Big Short was an apology and an honest proclamation by the filmmakers that they didn't even come close to telling you the whole story, which is where I come in. We did. We told the complete story, at least as it relates to what created the great financial crisis and what happened when it all blew up. But I was quashed by the system because what we reveal and what I've learned since is that what took place behind the scenes, behind the curtain, was this massive maneuvering of our financial system to illegally plug in tens of trillions of dollars to the financial system that blew up the world that Eric Holder didn't hold to account. And it happens to be my theory that the likes of Vladimir Putin, who was the victim of long-term capital management, which was a massive meltdown on a similar structure that destroyed the ruble, that ultimately blew up the Soviet Union. And I think he's been playing the long game since, because both he and Trump go back to those days, and they've been in business together through pageants. Which, think about Donald Trump and his pageant, and and Epstein and all of that sort of mishigas all lines up. But of course, anybody who knows anything knows that Putin's got to have something on Trump, which I think comes back to this whole sort of scenario, which is less important to me than the fact that these guys have been involved with financial, criminal, global racketeering and are now in cahoots. And in some capacity, I believe, and I didn't finish this thought earlier when I said that the billionaire class is playing roulette with democracy because of Trump. But now I think Trump is basically playing roulette with himself because of Epstein and MAGA's reaction to it, which may or may not be a Mussolini ending. Whatever is going to happen, I can assure you that based on all of the calamity that's happening with the destruction from Doge of US aid and other elements that are involved, literally tens of millions of people are going to die. They may even be you in a plane that collides with another plane because of, air traffic control is being decimated. You can't be a superpower when the uber rich completely control everything for tax, cuts, so that they can put 17 million, old ladies and people on Medicaid into the street, while at the same time, because of destroying women's health care, most likely the biggest calamity are going to be young African-American boys that are not going to make it to age 6, among other data that is correlated to this whole just savage breakdown of our American society. But it all stems from the corruption of our financial system and the destruction of law, in which our entire government is in on. So the Democrats right now are, hey, let's release the Epstein files. Okay, the Republicans aren't going to let that, but if they did, and then it were somehow placated Clinton and all of the elements of, maybe Clinton through, Obama intelligence. Yeah, I doubt it's ever going to get that far, because a concurrent sort of scenario to this, and this stuff goes back to Reagan, quite frankly, in terms of all of the elements that have upended the New Deal that ended up, creating this sort of deregulation, desupervision, and decriminalization that's created this ginormous racketeering scenario. And during the Democratic side of it, that was relatively hidden until we came around with the con and figured it all out. Now it's all naked and in the open. Donald Trump is, of course, the emperor's new clothes on really bad acid. This nightmare gets worse and worse by the day. And so when you understand the causality of the racketeering, of the system, of the grift, and then you understand that our institutions, such as the Department of Justice and the FBI, were marginalized specifically under Eric Holder, that then led to what ultimately became all the stuff that happened with Bill Barr, which led to Epstein, which then, of course, led to now with Pam Bondi. And oh, yeah, by the way, Pam Bondi made her bones by being a whore for Bank of America because of hiding and disrupting and destroying everything that led to what the courts did and what we call standing, which was what was a great book by Chain of Title, David Dayen. But that's part of our work too. And I've got those answers infinitum because I went to the Registry of Deeds and I found out the insane magnitude of liars' foreclosures because of fraudulent paperwork. And our system just got completely overrun with this toxic pollution of everybody chasing the short term where the entire house of cards fell. And instead of we righting the ship, because if a ship sinks because of some engineering debacle, you got to fix it before you get back on board, right? Same with a plane, same with a car. You got to understand the problem, but we have not done that with our financial system. And as a result, it's gotten worse and worse and worse. And so that leads us to what's behind me, the Clean New Deal. Okay. So I'm just going to lay it out briefly, and then hopefully you guys can go to www.thecleannewdeal.org and wrap your head around why this is the only pathway forward to purge the misery of tyranny and unleash the renaissance of possibility. Do you remember I said that the financial system got away with $71 trillion? They got away with that illegally, with nobody looking, that just fused big money to the billionaire apparatuses that used legal corruption to own the government, which is the reason why we're in this position. The Democrats don't have a way out of this, not remotely. They're playing the game that Trump is going to blow up on his own stupidity and his own petard, as they like to say. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. But it doesn't change the fact that the billionaire griftopia is still in control unless you understand the causality, which gets you to the solution. It's simply about the integrity of the system to investigate and to take down the corruption, which is the Clean New Deal. Now, we all think that we're supposedly equal in this country, but we all know that we're not also. But what I do is I deconstruct through the 4 questions the understanding of how you get to fully realize what we are as a country, which isn't a democracy, and it's certainly not free market capitalism. A, there's no risk reward in this system. And B, it all is predicated on, what is the term when we call it? It'll come back to me in a second. When you basically use the full faith and credit to bail out criminality. I say we're not a democracy. I say we're a corporate fascist state undergirded by a criminal syndicate that uses the full faith and credit of the United States to guarantee the mafiocracy that is now fueling fascism. And that's exactly what it is. And it was just on the tip of my tongue. I was going to go from plausible deniability with this whole murkiness of this smoke and mirrors effect when people don't understand geopolitics, the law, and quite frankly, psychology, which gets us, and it's right on the tip of my tongue, and it'll come to me in a minute. I know it's just going to come in the back of my head. But when you understand the perversion and the insanity of what we're in the midst of, and I'm not just talking about, the likes of Epstein, pedophilia, right? If we're going to call it that. Not to mention what has the church been doing, the Catholic Church forever, and from what I understand, pretty much every religion. I don't get this whole thing, but man, I'll tell you, when Elon Musk took over X, the first thing that took place was the projection of everybody being ensconced in this like trafficking ring of the Democrats and, basically preying on children. And I kept thinking to myself, is that projection? Have all of these people been molested? I still think that's the case. I myself have never been down that path, so I don't know that from personal experience. Maybe you do. Maybe you know what it's like to be raped as an underage person. I know it happens like crazy, but it seems to be everywhere, right? And it seems to be this undergirded thing where there's a sickness that's been there apparently for decades, okay? But when you understand the perversion of power, so for example, a priest that is in front of his congregation, and meanwhile he's raping children in the flock, and then the whole flock is there to like be complicit in that situation because why? They don't want to challenge the priest. That's what sheeple do. But in a nation of laws and justice, no, you stop the predator and you freaking have a remedy, which is typically the law. And we all hear what happens to child rapists that go to prison, right? It's not good, supposedly. So I frame this whole argument based on the four questions that you have to understand that are like the Rubik's Cube. What is qualified immunity? What is judicial immunity? What is presidential immunity? And what is the electoral college? Which gets us into the precepts of the Clean New Deal. So to get out of this madness, of this insane corruption, of the insane and hierarchy, of this debt-fueled system, of a debt trap, slave trap for people that are below the line, that are expendable for the system that have been raped and pillaged now for the last basically 13 years, if not longer. And obviously minorities have been dealing with this from the beginning of time, quite frankly. But you have to understand money, and you have to understand that the way to break this cycle of the uber rich and the powerful billionaire structure to be able to piss on your head telling you it's rain is we as a society have to come together and we have to force a new Glass-Steagall. Glass-Steagall was a law that was passed in the aftermath of the Great Depression to prevent banks from gambling with other people's money. Then we deregulated from the Clinton administration on. That gave Wall Street the opportunity to do that again, which then led to them blowing up the world in 2008, where they took a $4.5 trillion housing calamity and they turned it into a $900 trillion global explosion, the likes the world had ever seen. And we put 30 trillion, 31 trillion, 33 trillion into the coffers of the people that blew it up in 2008 behind the scenes to the Federal Reserve, because they used Federal Reserve Act 13.3 to expand the credit lending under exigent circumstances, because we're the world's reserve currency and we can do that. We can digitize dollars into the accounts to basically create liquidity, which is what creates the economic flow. But in the hands of the corrupt, they, basically set everybody up to fail because everybody's expendable for their bonus is what it comes down to in this racketeering enterprise because of perverse incentives. And what we have to do with now is we have to add the language to the statute that already exists that you can't use the full faith and credit of the United States to guarantee global racketeering. Can you believe that we'd actually have to say that? Well, it's actually in the statutes of Federal Reserve Act 13.3 that exigent lending does not cover commodities trading, particularly in real estate. What did I just preface with the 2008 great financial crisis? Global real estate. So there's that. And the flip side of the coin is what many of you know that millions react to every time Bernie Sanders talks about this. And by the way, Bernie Sanders knows of the information that I speak, and he never went to it because he and the Democrats made a Faustian bargain in the aftermath of the 2008 great financial crisis. Instead of letting the entire world melt down, they saved the top 10% basically. And then they ended up with Dodd-Frank, which is supposed to make sure this didn't happen again. And then ultimately they created the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that has just been gutted during, Trump's first part of Doge. And, that was the bargain, as opposed to tell you the truth that I had to go thousands and thousands of miles in tens of years and thousands of hours and millions of dollars to aggregate. But our cost to be able to get this information that we're providing you now for free came because the $90 billion apparatus of Eric Holder's Department of Justice all the way through now, Pam Bondi, which is the sick result of all of this stuff, and the FBI and the DOJ and the SEC, these guys operate north of $80 billion a year to the tune of, 10,000 employees, and they did not reveal to you what I'm revealing to you. And I've got much more information. That's at thecleannewdeal.org. So the flip side of all this stuff with Bernie is we've got to end Citizens United. You can't have dark money roofing and raping and P. Diddying and what do we call it, freak off in the shadows. That's shadow banking on our government. Because if we give these billionaire apparatuses all the money in the world to control our government, who's the government going to work for? The billionaires. And this is how you break their iron grip of control. But you've got to understand that we spent $71 trillion. This is the third point of the precept of the Clean New Deal. We've spent $71 trillion on corruption for the hands of the few to control the many. It's the many versus the money. When you unite with me, when you understand who this is, what we do is we purge the misery of tyranny to create the renaissance of possibility, because are there better ways to spend $71 trillion than on insanity like Trump, the dumbest idiot in the entire world, destroying the Department of Education? Not to mention, what are they doing in terms of the sciences? And like I said, in terms of fossil fuel and everything we've seen, this is a direct result of what we've been living in for years, because the fossil fuel matrix is what controls the whole show. And they don't want you to understand the science of climate change. That's why they're getting rid of all this, in addition to drill, baby, drill, which is backdooring and has backdoored, I think, over $10 billion illegally to the Trump coffers since he entered office. Do you know that the president gets like $460,000 a year salary? That's what it was a long time ago. I don't know if it is now, but it's not 10 billion. And that's direct corruption based on emoluments clause and anti-constitutional behavior and lawless behavior and everything that's led to the likes of, all of this collateral damage, not to mention ICE on the streets. And they're going to stick $85 billion into ICE to create more concentration camps and all of this insanity, which, because corruption burns and fuels fascism. So if you follow me and we get involved and unite together, we know that there's $71 trillion as a starter to be able to recreate the paradigm of the United States. Get rid of systemic racism in prison, recreate our energy paradigm, which I think is going to cost in the neighborhood of $7 trillion, especially if it's managed correctly. To reboot the Department of Education, but more importantly, above all else, if I were the president, one of the first executive orders I do is basically create large budgets for the Department of Justice to do investigations to take down these criminal apparatuses. Because right now there is no regulation. In fact, Jamie Dimon was on the front page of the New York Times this morning proclaiming that bank profits are good. This in the midst of what? Taco? Trump always chickens out based on the tariffs and whatever calamity that may or may not bring. It seems to me that Wall Street, is just fine as long as he doesn't go into their realm. He can go stick it to everybody else and they're fine with that. So go figure, right? So yes, there are better ways to spend $71 trillion than on corruption. Then you got to address the four questions. We got to get rid of qualified immunity. No police officer should be able to get away with murder. They're not above the law. Same with judicial immunity. The Supreme Court justices shouldn't be, stricken to a canon of ethics. They should be connected to the law. If they're investigated and proven to have been involved with corruption, like we see Clarence Thomas, Judge Alito guarantee Kegerator Kavanaugh, and maybe Justice Roberts, and maybe Comey Barrett, not quite so sure about that, and they're involved, should they be able to sit on the Supreme Court or go to jail? It is a rhetorical question. And then, of course, the unitary presidency as emulated by the freaking corrupt Supreme Court when they said presidential immunity to etch a sketch the 14th Amendment, Section 3. My God, people, do you not understand the calamity of the diabolical betrayal of the system of corruption? It's insane. And the only way you can do that on election standard is, A, are we going to see free and fair elections again? Not according to Mark Elias. The work he's been doing is fantastic. And I do have to say that Eric Holder's been doing good work in terms of gerrymandering and, the states and what they're trying to do to basically give MAGA a leg up on stealing the elections, which I'm absolutely convinced they did in the 2024 election, because we know that they purged 3.5 million votes in swing states based on Jim Crow laws, and then there were anomalies all over the place in swing states especially that may or may not have some sort of connection to Starlink. Go figure, right? Then after, I think I did I miss out on I think I was talking about we've got to end the electoral college. Look, Trump actually tried to steal the electoral college using falsification of documents with electoral fraud that he never went down for. That was going to be part of the RICO situation down in Fonnie Willis's investigation in Georgia that she messed up because she had an affair. And obviously the Justice Department couldn't get a hold on that because they're befuddled freaking morons. But the bottom line is that, yeah, that was another case of falsification of documents to steal the electoral college. But the electoral college is a perverse inverse of power by the minority, because billionaires can control small states and, swing electoral college, and it just doesn't work in a situation where you have a state like Wyoming with an exorbitant amount of billionaires having as much legislative influence as a state like California that has 50 million Americans. It's absolutely insane. So there's that. And then the two remaining parts of the precepts of the Clean New Deal is we've got to have term limits. We got to prevent Congress from front running by insider trading on stocks that they know the government's going to be able to influence, which is absolutely absurd. That's pure corruption. And then the final piece of it relates to SCOTUS, which is you got to get 13 members, 13 judicial assignees on the judicial court to weigh out this monstrosity of the Roberts Court. All of that stuff is possible if tens of millions of you come together. And if you happen to go to the cleannewdeal.org and you see the section of what we're going to do, I basically laid out a year ago, before No Kings, before the Hands Off rally, before everything that's been going on this summer, where I've seen all of these questions plastered over posters all over the country. These are the answers that everybody's asking questions about. But what I proposed was that we have to have a smash mob in Washington, D.C., where literally millions of us surround the Department of Justice, the Supreme Court, Congress, the White House. What am I missing? The Federal Reserve. To say the jig is up. You're not pissing on our head telling us it's rain. We know what you've done because of this work that Patrick Lovell has brought to us and the Con and the New Untouchables, where we rallied to the Washington Wall. We stand underneath the A's of Abraham Lincoln, who said, "A nation of, by, and for the people shall not perish from this earth." Across from the reflecting pond of Martin Luther King, who said, "The moral arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice." We make the justice we seek in this world. I studied political science. I've been engaged with history my entire life. I understand geopolitics. I understand psychology. I understand economics. I understand the law. I understand how all of these things work and can be completely manipulated by billionaire powers if you, the citizen, isn't equipped with the knowledge and ability to fight back. You got to think of it as a football game. You're on offense, you're on defense, you're on special teams. There's situations, how much time is on the clock, what kind of turnovers there are. All of these things manifest to where you have to be active, but you cannot be unless you understand the facts. So just understand, in closing here, that Donald Trump is, again, exercising his calculus that he's done for decades. Lie, deny, switch the blame, and implicate. He's saying that the Obama administration is falsifying documents to frame him for Epstein. His entire career has been involved with falsifying documents based on everything that I've laid out, but just know he's a tiny piece of the puzzle. The entire financial industry was involved with tens of millions of forgeries and falsification of business records in the housing calamity that then led to literally, and still is involved with, years and years and years of our judicial system exercising the same fraudulent document with the perjury of attorneys who are lying about a chain of title because nobody can stop them. Because we gave the system tens of trillions of dollars illegally for free, and now they're destroying everything else. Guys, millions of people are going to die. They're destroying the law, and they're destroying the planet that may be the only planet in infinity that can support life. I doubt that, but at the same time, we don't know that for sure. Please become a nuclear vector for truth, to become a nuclear reaction, to force this truth through the darkness, because when you have the truth, you live in light. When you live a lie, you are depraved. When you have the truth, you're bulletproof. When you live a lie, inside you die. Stop lying. Stop buying lies. Support the Clean New Deal. Join us. I'm always available if you have any questions. Please reach out to me or my colleague, Roseanne Rabiola-Mile. Thank you for listening. I had to drop this truth bomb today. Please like, please subscribe, please share, and please check out the New Untouchables and everything else that we lay out. All the best to you. Onwards and upwards.